Hello, welcome to our presentation on dynamics of family violence. My name is Rebecca Jutner, and I will be presenting with Alicia Burke. So the first thing I wanted to tie into this theory is actually the social exchange theory. I know we just learned about this, and we know that it's all about costs and rewards. And so when the cost outweighs the rewards, people will often leave or abandon the relationship. So for positive relationships, if the positive outweigh the negative or the rewards are more than the costs, then people will often stay. But if in negative relationships, it means that the negative outweigh the positive or the costs are more than the rewards, and that oftentimes causes people to leave. Another factor are expectations. They also play a huge role in whether or not people will leave or stay in relationships. It all has to do with your frame of reference and your perspective. And expectations are often influenced by past experiences. So the two big questions people in a relationship ask when they're deciding to leave are, will I be better off? And what are the rewards? And can I do it? What are the costs? So I want to talk about expectations and comparison level. So comparison level CL is the product of our experiences in relationships and our general expectations. So if the relationship exceeds our CL, then we'll often stay in that relationship. But if we've had bad experiences in relationships, then our CL will be low. And if we have good experiences, then our CL will be high. So people also tend to stay in relationships when they feel that more attractive alternative relationships are not available to them. So like I mentioned before, our expectations and our comparison level play a huge role in whether people stay or go in relationships. So unfortunately, people who have experienced abuse or have been in abusive relationships in the past are way more likely to have them in the future. And it's because they might not understand what a healthy relationship is anymore. They might not have a healthy frame of reference. If they had a relationship where it's really, really bad, then their CL, their expectations will be very, very low, possibly for their next relationship, and it could cause a vicious cycle. Another thing I wanted to talk about of why people will stay in bad relationships is that the abuse can be normalized. They might not understand what's healthy and what's not healthy anymore because what they've known and their whole frame of reference for a relationship could be very toxic. And like I mentioned before, the re-victimization, people who experience childhood abuse or domestic abuse have an increased likelihood of experiencing it again, which is really unfortunate and sad. And another reason why people stay is fear. They might be afraid of leaving an abusive relationship because of the consequences or retaliation from their abuser. It might be the cost might be too high versus the rewards. So they might want to leave, but the cost and the cost of being in danger of leaving might be too great for them to do that. Another thing I wanted to mention is codependency. It's a psychological condition or relationship in which a person manifesting low self-esteem and a strong desire for approval has an unhealthy attachment to another, often controlling or manipulative person, such as a person with an addiction to alcohol or drugs. So that's something that can also develop because people who are in abusive relationships can develop very, very low self-esteem, and it can create them to have a strong desire for approval, and they can become attached to them in an unhealthy way. Another reason is shame. There could be a lot of social stigma, and it can be it's very painful and embarrassing and awful to go through something like that. And the abuser can also use a tactic called blame shifting, which can make the abused person feel that they deserved the treatment they received, which is really, really awful and not true because nobody deserves to be treated like that. But abusers are extremely manipulative, and they can make the abused feel like that, and that can cause them to stay. So I wanted to play this little video. I really liked it, and I think it's really helpful.
So what does an abusive relationship look like? Let's start out with the more obvious signs. Does your partner hit or force intercourse with you? Physical and sexual abuse should never be tolerated. So why do victims never walk away immediately? Because abusive partners tend to be very manipulative. They might not always be violent like most movies and social media portray it. "I'm sorry, babe, I didn't mean to," they'll often say as they embrace their partner with a loving hug, or, "I was just having a bad day. I won't do it again." This is how it all starts. And because the victim usually sees the best in their partner, they'll believe them. Abusive partners may even make it up to their victims by showering them with gifts the next day. They know when to use just enough kindness to win them back every time. When this happens, they'll keep pushing the boundary of what is allowed to see what they can get away with. And that's how this cycle repeats. An abusive relationship can also be mental or emotional. Common tactics the abuser will use are love bombing and gaslighting. When the victim feels like they've had enough and tell their partner they're going to leave, the abuser will use love bombing and might say something like, "If you leave me, I won't know what to do with myself." This is why, on average, victims usually attempt to leave 7 times before actually leaving for good. When the victim is being gaslighted, the abuser will make them feel as though they are going crazy or not remembering things right. Consequently, the victim will start to blame themselves for the actions of their partner. This is how the abuser stays in control, pulling at the strings of the victim, whether they guilt-trip them or threaten to hurt themselves if they leave. More often than not, the victim will be too afraid to leave the relationship, worrying it's not a safe decision. In extreme cases, it can even be life-threatening, where women are 70 times more likely to be killed after they leave the relationship. And sometimes it can be the social pressures that cause victims to suffer longer than they wish. Some abusers will seem like the perfect spouse who is financially and professionally successful. Friends and family members of the victim might get easily sucked into the abuser's dangerously charming ways and believe they are Mr. or Mrs. Perfect, dismissing the victim's horror stories. The list goes on, but the relationship doesn't have to.
All right. So again, I just wanted to quickly mention that low self-esteem is a huge factor. Being in an abusive relationship with someone who shames, ridicules, and makes the abused question their decisions and capabilities can result in low self-esteem. And that can cause people not to leave. They might not believe in themselves to be independent anymore. They may want to keep their families together. They may just simply lack the resources. They might not have had education or be able to have a job or be able to work enough to be able to sustain their family. And so that's why they stay. I also wanted to mention that the statistic on cohabiting couples versus married couples, they found that a higher rate of domestic violence among cohabiting couples as compared with married couples, and more than 80% of incidences involve boyfriends and girlfriends. And these partnerships result in most physical violence, which I didn't know and I thought was very interesting. And I wanted to quickly talk about the types of abuse. There's control, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse and intimidation, isolation, verbal abuse, coercion, threats and blame, economic abuse, and stalking.
The cycles of violence, also known as the cycles of abuse, illustrate common patterns of abusive behavior in relationships. The first is tension build. The abusive partner's anger is fueled by external reasons. Anything can set them off, such as problems at work, fatigue, family issues, illness. They may not like what the food tastes like. It is pretty random. Feelings of frustration build over time. Then the abuser experiences feelings of injustice, paranoia, and powerlessness. The victim tries to lessen the conflict to avoid confrontation. They may feel anxious and will try to tiptoe, walk around eggshells around the abuser, and try to offer emotional or physical support to kind of mediate the damage. Number 2 is confrontation. The perpetrator releases the pressure and gains control by lashing out. They may engage in name-calling, insults, physical and sexual violence, attempts to control the behavior, and threats of harm and property damage. And the abuser will likely blame the person, the victim, for what's going on. They may say, you know, it's all your fault if you didn't do this, and I wouldn't have to do whatever. The third phase of this cycle is when the couples reconciles, and is called also the honeymoon stage. After the incident, the pressure is released and begins to kind of dissipate and go away. The abuser feels guilty and apologizes for their behavior, and they may use kind words and loving gestures, even give the victim gifts. The abused may feel close to the perpetrator and believe that they have the relationship back, and they kind of tend to think this is never going to happen again. Their reaction may be explained by the release of oxytocin and dopamine in the brain, which make the victim feel closely bonded to the abuser. And the last step in the cycle is calm. The partners tend to justify what's going on, and the abuser may apologize while usually placing the blame on the victim for their behaviors or somebody else. It's always somebody else's fault. They deny or minimize the abuse and accuse the partner of instigating and provoking the behavior. They may promise it will never happen again, and the abused may be touched by the perpetrator's remorse and convince themselves that the abuse was just a fluke, has never happened again. He's really sorry for what he did, or she. And they have all high hopes that this is just a once and done experience. Now, it's also it's good to remember that the abuse happens on the hands of men and women. It's not just, although mostly women suffer violence, some women also inflicted. There is help available. Here are some ideas as to where to call to find resources that can step in and help out. Thank you.
And then here is our references page with all of the information that we used. And thank you for watching.